The NBA Finals.
Hearts are racing, heads are pounding.
No time to rest. No time to look away.
It's unbelievable.
Because in the finals, everything changes.
Oh, it's good.
Fate collides with destiny. Today's stars become tomorrow's inspirations. And 4 wins turn the end of a season into the start of a legacy. Don't miss the NBA Finals on ABC.
Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. It is June 1st, 2023. A beautiful summer day here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Ryan Clark, joined by Chris Reifer. A fun night last night, May 31st for PTFC. It was a thriller for the Thorns, a 3-2 win over Angel City FC in the NWSL Challenge Cup. Morgan Weaver with a back heel, a scorpion kick, whatever you want to call it, at the death.
A
really
nice flick
exciting.
on is what I'll call it. A really nice finishing flick.
Oh yeah, amazing finishing flick, and just a primal scream afterwards,
Yeah, that was
as
cool.
she so often does with her celebrations. Great ball in, of course, by Christine Sinclair, who, we'll talk more about the midfield shape and how she fits into that picture in a moment, but. That's what a great player can give you, even at an advanced age and at a point in her career where, she is a different player than she used to be. She's going to put a ball in like that for somebody like Weaver, who we know has the capability to finish it off with class. Big win there for the Thorns in terms of the Challenge Cup. Obviously, second place in the group now with just 3 points behind OL Reign, who have played one more in the group stage than they have.
I think 4 points behind the Reign. The Reign, I think, are on 7.
Yeah, they are.
And the Thorns are on 3.
Yep. Reign are on 7. Thorns are on 3. You obviously want to either win the group or be the best finishing second place team to advance in the Challenge Cup. But, big win. Really, they had the lead. They relinquished it with some tactical issues in the middle of the game. And Izzy DeQuilla talked post game about this, and so did Mike Norris, that putting together a full 90 minutes has been a little bit of a struggle lately for the Thorns. And that, I think, was evident in conceding those 2 goals. But otherwise, it was more of the same for the Thorns, throwing a ton at the wall and enough stuck to get the win. And they were excellent on the attack. And I thought, probably left a goal or 2 on the table, just given, how many quality chances they had. But great game and an important win for them in the group stage.
Yeah, really important win. To the extent that the Challenge Cup is important for the Thorns, and I think it's important but not critical for the Thorns this year. But if you're in it and you're there, you want to compete.
Yeah, they want to win it and they want to compete. It's just, the realities of balancing it with the regular season and the World Cup and their prioritization of wanting to not only win the championship but win the Shield this year. Like they have to rotate the way they did, and to their credit, to their depth, it's a starting level team out there that is heavily rotated for the Thorns, and one player, but before we get further into the details of the game itself, one player who I thought really stood out.
Izzy DeQuilla.
Well, yeah, of course, Izzy DeQuilla. But another
You're going somewhere else. Okay, wow. I thought this was like an Izzy DeQuilla coming out party, but go ahead.
No.
Go ahead.
It absolutely was for DeQuilla, and we got to give her flowers for
somebody. By the way, needs to put together a flag or a 2-stick or something using the old Izzy's Pizza logo. Like Izzy's Pizza and Goal Buffet or something like that.
A buffet of goals.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Perfect. So Izzy was great. I will give her credit where it's due, but the player I was going to mention was Olivia Moultrie. I thought that, end to end.
Oh, that's been happening for a while though.
Yeah, but
that ain't new.
But this was like, I think, her best game of late. She was just a constant presence on both ends of the field. So she was great. Izzy was great. And a lot of positives to take away from a game that featured a lot of depth players for Portland.
Yeah. I think the result was really important in terms of just the competition. This is the Thorns are very much in a group of death in the Challenge Cup. This West Coast group is so nasty. I mean, you could probably make an argument that it's 4 of the 6 best teams in the league in the same group, which, hey, maybe just going forward, let's think about that a little bit and not doing this fully regionally because, boy, that Midwest group looks really nice to be in a lot nicer than this West Coast group where you've got, I mean, certainly at least 3 of the top 5, and I would argue probably 4 of the top 6, certainly on talent. I think that Angel City team is very talented. And yeah, I mean, that having that sort of group of folks, group of teams, you can't afford to let results like this get away. And it looked for a moment like they would, but coming through and finding that third goal, I think is huge.
Would you change the groups to, the top 4 finishers are like in split among different groups, and then your top 3 finishers, I should say, and then you just split it out from there with like 4 through 6 and 7 through 9 and so on?
I think you can make arguments for it. I also think you can probably say, yeah, it's just kind of weird how good the West Coast the West Coast teams are this year, and maybe that's a little bit of a fluke, and doing it regionally just makes sense. I don't know. I mean, I think you can make arguments either way. Obviously, the Challenge Cup is both a young tournament. It's only been around this is the 3rd, maybe 4th year. I don't really know how time has worked since 2020. It's been different, and I still haven't caught up to it. But yeah, I mean, it's a young tournament. They're still figuring out the format. But the point is, this is very much the group of death, and it is going to be really difficult to win this group. It's even going to be difficult to get second in this group, just because of how that plays out in terms of the competition. So, I mean, frankly, I was kind of thinking when the game was 2-2, I was kind of like, this might be it for the Thorns Challenge Cup campaign if they're not able to get this win. Because if you lose one of these games or even draw one of these games at home, you may well put yourself just too far behind the 8 ball to be able to catch up to a team like the Rain.
Yeah, they would have been last place in the group at that point if they
with games to play.
Yeah,
by all means. But it was an important game. It was a game that the Thorns had to win in order to stay in the Challenge Cup, and they did. And credit to them. I agree with you that Olivia Moultrie was very, very good. Once again for the Thorns, as she's been basically all year, but especially over the course of the last month or so, she's been one of the better players. And I also sort of had moments when the Thorns were playing really well. I was kind of like, look, I mean, this team, even with the World Cup absences, still got Olivia Moultrie, still got Morgan Weaver, still got Izzy D'Aquila, who's playing very, very well, still got Sam Coffey. That's a team that can still do some damage, and that might even have an advantage in remaining players over some other teams with what they're going to lose. So I think that was another positive takeaway. Go ahead.
That's crazy. That's crazy too. I was going to say, because they have so many players
losing so many, but yeah. there's sort of a next player up kind of dynamic that a lot of teams talk about, and not very many teams actually have. And I think the Thorns have it. I think there are more questions in the back 6 than there are up front. But I think the takeaway is that the Thorns attacking unit, even when they lose Crystal Dunn and Sophia Smith for the World Cup, superlative players, is still going to be pretty potent, and is still going to be a real problem for opponents. And so I think those are all positive takeaways. And look, in a game in which you score 3 goals, the attack isn't the problem. I agree with you that there were some opportunities that went awry, but the attack isn't the problem. And I think the area that, frankly, I'm sure Mike Norris and Izzy D'Aquila, when they were talking about this post-game, were talking about is their ability to sort of take control of the game after they went up 2-0. Frankly, they were deservedly up 2-0. They were much better than Angel City in that first half. They were much better to open the second half than Angel City. And they were deservedly up decidedly in the game. And it's been a recurring issue now for the Thorns team that even when they get in that position, they got ahead at Houston and kind of lost control of the game. They've had against Angel City in NWSL play at Providence Park a month or so ago. Similar kind of story where they got ahead but couldn't maintain control of the game. And I think we saw that dynamic play out here again. And frankly, I mean, in many respects, I kind of regard that as being the missing piece. That if they can figure out, I don't see a weakness in this team heading into the Shield race. I don't see a weakness in this team heading into the playoffs if they can figure that out. But if they can't, if it remains an issue, I think that's something that is problematic in regular season play. I think that's a near fatal flaw in the playoffs, right? Because
you're going to face teams that are going to be far more formidable at that point, and that are going to be playing up for it. You're going to have a target on your back if you're the Thorns every time you're out there, whether they have the first round bye or they slip up late in the season and don't. Those games on the road or at home are going to be extremely difficult.
Well, and game states. So to kind of introduce the concept, game states that is a phrase that's really just used to describe the score of the game and how the score affects how the game will play out and how the teams will play tactically. And so in a leading game state, you're going to play one way. If your team is going to play one way, right? If they have the lead. In a trailing game state, if they're behind, they're going to play another way, right? They're going to push more players on. They're going to try to get into the attack more and that kind of thing. And so that phrase game state is just used to describe those dynamics and how they can change over the course of a game. Regular season games can be really game statey. And what I mean by that is they can sort of change really dramatically based on the score. But they're not nearly as game statey as playoff games. Game states are everything in the playoffs. And what the Thorns are really struggling with right now is the ability to control that game state in which they're kind of on top of the game, in which they're leading. And that's a big challenge when you get toward the playoffs, because there are going to be times in the playoffs where you're playing a good opponent, maybe even on the road, where hopefully you're leading, but you need to be able to maintain that lead. And right now the Thorns are kind of in a dynamic when they get into these game states, the games kind of have a feeling of all gas, no brakes. And that's not what you want. When you have a lead, especially when you have a 2-0 lead, like they did against Angel City last night in the Challenge Cup, you want to be able to take control of the game, to slow the game down in many respects, right? To control the spaces in behind, to not let players like Alyssa Thompson get out into space and on the loose. And by doing that, not only are you defending better, but you're then forcing Angel City to take more risks, right? You're forcing Angel City to push more players into the attack. You're opening up the gap. So when you bring on a Morgan Weaver in the 70th minute, or when you bring on a Sophia Smith in the 80th minute, they're going to be the ones that have the space to run into, because Angel City's got to chuck numbers forward just to try to get goals back, right?
Yeah, we saw it happen like pretty much as soon as Soph came on. She made a run deep into the box, and if Weaver's cross had been slightly more accurate, that's a goal within like 5 seconds of coming on.
But I mean, the spaces that they have to play with are so much bigger if instead of defending and try to hold on for the draw, Angel City is having to push numbers forward to try to get a goal. And that really is the point, that the Thorns have not done a great job this year of controlling those leading game states. And I think it basically comes down to two things as I see it. First, they're really pushing their fullbacks early in possession, which when they give up possession in certain spots means they're really exposed. The penalty that Alyssa Thompson drew, which was 100% a penalty, correctly given after VAR.
Really? Okay.
No question.
As a putting a quick pause on that to discuss that. I mean, what's your viewpoint there? Because that was a pretty controversial call in the moment, and fans were pretty upset because they thought that Hogan had already started going for the ball prior to Thompson going for the toe poke, which put her leg out.
Thompson got the touch on the ball and Hogan got none of it. I mean, okay. that's the short end of it is that Thompson got the touch on the ball, and it was kind of a weird play. I think there are questions to be asked with the Thorns defense in that moment, and the support that Hogan was getting from her defense. But Thompson got a touch on the ball, and cleanly. It's not like she had to go through Hogan to get it. And then Hogan just clattered into Thompson without getting any touch on the ball.
Yeah, I mean that's world class speed too.
Yeah,
from
question.
Thompson.
I mean, look, Alyssa Thompson's a really good player, and she has some physical attributes that cause problems, especially for a back six like the Thorns. And this is true even when the Thorns have all their best players. That's not very athletic. I think the Thorns' defense is pretty good when they're tactically set up right. They certainly have some very good players. Becky Sauerbrunn is solid soccer player. And they have some pretty Natalia Kuika, solid soccer player. Megan Klingenberg, solid soccer player. Kelly Helbig, solid soccer player. Sam Coffey, solid soccer player. I mean, they've got good players back there, but it's not a particularly athletic unit. And we've seen them be exploited by Caroline. We've seen them be exploited by Alyssa Thompson a couple times now. And so, I mean, you just kind of have to be conscious of that weakness.
Yeah, I mean, there is an athletic gap in those situations for sure, but I do think, and you may have been leading into this point, that their defensive shape and their reaction times to those situations have been superb. And I think they were last night, with the exception of that one situation with Thompson. And then there was one other play where they gave it away at the back, and Thompson had a shot that, if she'd put it a little more on frame, it would have definitely gone in. But overall, though, I think their defensive shape and their discipline, their communication makes up for maybe that athletic gap and then some.
I think it can, but you still look at how gappy they were, even up 2-0. And I think it's just too much, right? That's not, you don't want to be gappy in those moments. You don't want to be having big gaps between your defensive line and your midfield line, which even in sort of defensive postures, the Thorns did. You don't, and part of that is because the back line was a little bit too deep at times. Certainly on the Angel City first goal, I think you'd probably say that the Thorns defense was too deep and was allowing too much space there. But there was a big old gap between the banks of four, and Angel City exploited that. And it's just those kinds of things, and it's moments in possession where the Thorns are at times kind of feeling and looking like they're almost playing with a 6 and 2 10s in central midfield because of the way that Christine Sinclair and Olivia Moultrie interact. That's not enough balance, especially when you get into those leading game states. Maybe that's the right balance if you're trailing and trying to find a goal. Maybe even if you're in an even game state and you're really trying to take the initiative in the attack, that's the right balance. But it's not the right balance when you're up 2-0. And I think it's figuring out those moments, how they're going to manage those moments. And it truly is a matter of game management. Figuring out how they're going to manage those moments is sort of the missing piece for me for this Thorns team. Because look, I mean, this Thorns team, they're a monster in the attack. A monster. They've got 6 attacking players who I would describe as a real problem, as being fully capable of causing problems for full-fledged first-choice NWSL defenses, right? Sophia Smith, Morgan Weaver, Crystal Dunn, Hina Sugita, Olivia Moultrie. I think Christine Sinclair is probably still in that. Izzy D'Aquila, I just named 6 or 7. I don't know. I can't count. But I mean, you've got all of those players who can be enormous problems for opposing defenses. And you have a back six that is talented and coherent, even if it has some athletic deficiencies. It's certainly still a good back six unit. I think you'd have to say. And so in many respects, it almost feels like they're getting into these game states where they're a goal up or 2 goals up, and they're like, we're going to win this game 4-0. You're just like, maybe that's not the approach. Like, maybe you will, because very often the best way to do that, as the Thorns did against, for example, the Current earlier this year, and as they did a number of times last year, including, I think, in the final, is a good example of this, is when you get to that positive game state, you start absorbing a little bit more and you keep things tight and you kind of close down the game. And then when the opponent starts taking risks, Sophia Smith's off to the races. Morgan Weaver's off to the races.
Counterattack is not something that they have to necessarily be scared of. In fact, it's something that, given the horses they've got,
the horses to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think that is the balance that they need to figure out. And that's why, for me, when we talk about, these games that kind of feel like they're in control of, but then they're losing control, I don't go to that's a confidence issue. That's not what I think the issue primarily is. I think it's a tactical issue, and the ability to play in a couple different ways and to have sort of the tactical savvy to change the way that they're playing in order to take advantage of the positive game state. I think that's what they need to work on. I think that's if they can unlock that ability and kind of get it back, because they did that really well toward the end of last year. If they can get that back, I think this team is, I think they're the favorites to win the Shield and to win the title again, if they can figure that out.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And, a big test for figuring out how to find that balance and, what it might look like against a high quality team is coming up on Saturday, right? They're playing at OL Reign, who, other than Gotham has been, I think, the biggest challenge to the Thorns' crown and to the Shield thus far this season. Maybe you throw San Diego in there too, but the Reign, they're the Shield winners from last year, and they've brought pretty much everybody back. They're deep, they're talented. They've got veteran contributors and players and leaders like Megan Rapinoe and others that have been stalwarts for their team. And this is a big rivalry matchup. The Thorns,
and the Reign have been kind of a thorn in the Thorns' side, to be honest.
Yeah, they have. They've had some of their more difficult games against the Reign. The attack that we've talked about that is just so difficult for NWSL teams to deal with. Of all the teams in NWSL, the Reign have been able to figure them out at the best in the last couple of years. And there have been really close, tactically interesting, gritty games between these two teams. And there's definitely the potential for that to happen on Saturday. But I do think this game in Seattle is the biggest test for the Thorns so far. You go on the road to San Diego. That's a difficult place to play, and a good
point for the Thorns.
Yeah, and a very good point for them. They to pull out a draw in the end there, thanks to the header from Rana Reyes. That was big. That was, I think, a character moment for this team and a get back type of result.
With a good performance overall too. I think the Thorns probably should have come out of Snapdragon feeling like they played pretty well. Like a draw was a just result. But they also played well enough that they could have nicked the win if they'd had a couple of moments in which they'd been a little bit cleaner.
Yeah, exactly. And they are going to want to put together a cleaner game against the Reign. They're going to be up for it. Both teams will be, but I think the Thorns in particular have a little bit of an edge right now of like, okay, let's go get a prove ourselves type win against a Reign team that has been formidable all year. And it's going to be part of a doubleheader too with the Timbers, who are going to play earlier against the Sounders. Maybe not
fair to call the Timbers Sounders game the undercard in that one.
Yes, like undoubtedly. I mean, the Thorns won second. It's the one that's more in prime time.
That's right.
So and well,
you can only tune in for one.
Yes, if you're busy doing other stuff on a Saturday, you're at brunch, having some mimosas, you happen to you happen to not catch the Timbers game. I don't know. I mean, look, the Timbers have been up for those games this year. Zach McGraw said those have really been the only games that they have been up for, but that's another subject for the next part of the podcast.
Yeah.
This Thorns Reign matchup is this Thorns Reign matchup is exciting. It's fun. It's appointment viewing for those who have CBS Sports Network. That'll be on 5 p.m.
for the 6 of you out there.
Yeah, for those of you who either still have cable and
have like the premium cable package you need to have CBS Sports Network.
Yeah, and I'll clarify this in a future story, but I'm pretty sure Paramount Plus, like, you can't watch CBS Sports Network specifically, which is really weird and non-inclusive. And like, if you're going to be the home of CBS Sports, like, why would you not have CBS Sports Network as part of your streaming? And package?
Why would you put one of the most compelling games in the league over the course of this early part of the season on the outlet that you were least likely to reach the most eyeballs? There are questions to ask.
Yeah, that should be on big CBS. I don't know what would
someplace where people can get it.
yeah, man. If it's not there, just have some form of stream on Paramount Plus that people can get to. I don't know. I feel like in the coming years, the broadcast situation for the NWSL is inevitably going to be improved and be more streamlined. They're going to find their way to get a better and more cohesive deal where there's not only more, hardcore fan eyeballs on the games, but casual eyeballs, people who are curious about it, growing the fan base. I mean, that feels like an imperative for the league in the coming years as it continues to grow.
I think that's 100% right. So this is going to be a very acute topic as we go forward into the offseason, because my understanding is, and I think it's been reported, that those media rights for 2024 are up for bidding. I think the product overall on Paramount Plus has slipped a little bit. The Paramount Plus product, hard. That is adversity for somebody who does a podcast. Saying something like Paramount Plus product, that's for somebody who does a podcast, that is like the away game at the Reign. That's the equivalent.
Well, prior preparation prevents poor performance there. So
that's right. The Paramount Plus product has, I think, I nailed it. Has I think slipped a little bit, frankly, this year, just in terms of the quality of the broadcast and that kind of thing. I think that's going to be a big question for next year, because this is, especially coming off a World Cup year, a compelling product that the NWSL has to sell. And it's a matter of whether they can find a medium that's going to deliver it to consumers like myself and like all of us in a compelling way. And I think it's going to be a real question about how that's going to go into the future. And I think if you're NWSL looking at this Thorns Reign game, this enormous game in the league, about which there should very justifiably be hype, and that's going to have a pretty good, an okay MLS game as the undercard to it. You want that on a channel, whatever that channel is, and using channel sort of broadly, not necessarily TV channel. You want that on a channel that's going to be able to get into homes and bars and all of those places across the country. Because this is the kind of game that if you're NWSL, you want everybody to see it, because it's going to be a good game. It's going to be an intense game. It's between two teams with a lot of history between them, with some recognizable stars on both sides. One thing that surprised me is kind of getting back to the on-field stuff with this game. So the Reign went down to San Diego in Challenge Cup last night and just clobbered the Wave. 3-0, if my memory is serving me. I looked at the lineups after that game. I was really surprised. So San Diego rotated pretty generously, as you'd expect, with the Challenge Cup midweek, yada, yada, yada. The Reign did not rotate nearly as much as I would have thought they would heading into the Thorns game. They played a number of first choice players who I think are going to have some heavy legs and are going to be expected to start again against the Thorns on the weekend. Whereas the Thorns, I think, made some really pragmatic choices in that respect. Sophia Smith hardly played at all. Crystal Dunn didn't play at all. Sam Coffey didn't play. Kelly Hubley didn't play. Natalia Kuika played a half. Megan Klingenberg played a half. They made some really pragmatic choices in their selections in an effort to make sure that they did have their full complement of weapons heading into the weekend. And I think the Reign were not nearly as measured in the way they went about that. They got the win in Challenge Cup, right? They romped over the Wave, that Snapdragon. That's a hard thing to do. But they took some risks in doing so. And so I think that's going to be a storyline, and should be a storyline heading into this weekend, whether the Reign are going to have sort of the legs that the Thorns do going into this game. And I certainly that will not go unnoticed on the Thorns side of things. And how the Thorns approach the game in order to exploit that advantage, I think, is going to be a big question.
Speaking of questions, We have several to discuss. Not from listeners necessarily. There aren't a list of questions. Although I've heard quite a great deal of them from some fine folks in the PTFC community and on Twitter. Some of whom were respectful. Some of whom were extremely frustrated and decided that my timeline was the one to take out their frustrations. But I digress. The the Timbers lost 4-1 at Sporting Kansas City. It was
we're going there.
It was without a doubt the low point of the season for the Timbers.
Yes, it is the low point so far.
Yes, that is something that folks
the
have pointed
Homer
out
Simpson
to me.
meme here.
Worst day of your life so far.
That's right.
It was really rough. They went up 1-0 early, and you thought, okay, maybe they're gonna get a good result out of this game because they really need to. And even if they did, it wouldn't have changed much in terms of their current situation. That's something that you've got to do, right? Is get 3 points in KC. They didn't. They got 0. They allowed the tying goal before the half, and then the second half was just the wheels fell off. They allowed the goal to make it 2-1, and the body language was pretty evidently
abysmal.
Bad. It was bad, and then they give up a goal right off the kickoff.
Yeah,
and Larry Smabiala with the own goal in his attempt to
not necessarily his fault.
Yeah,
he's got to make
not
a play.
really.
It's
He's got to do something back there.
The problems are before then. They include him, but they're before then.
Yeah, and their problems are many, and there's a lot to discuss in terms of the layers of that game. The on-field tactical issues and performance and everything like that. There's a lot to talk about what players said was the issue or have been the issues versus what coaches have said in press conferences versus in the weeks after press conferences, the differing communications of the Portland Timbers and whether they are on the same page, whether the issues that they have are going to persist, which it seems like they're going to, given recent play. If they're able to crawl out of this, given how difficult the upcoming stretch of games is for them against quality opponents, including Seattle on Saturday. It's pretty grim, honestly. It's not feeling super good around the training grounds right now. There's some frowns. There's some guys, I every time I see somebody at the training grounds, it's like, hey man, how's it going? To any number of the players. And most of the time it's like, oh, good, how's it going? Or like a fist bump or whatever, or a nod. There were a couple of guys that basically were straight up like, yeah, I've been better. Or, oh, I've shrugging the shoulders, it's and that's, I don't think they're dejected. I don't think that they're, just giving up on the season completely at this point. I think that they're mad. I think that they're frustrated, and, now it's on them. It's on the staff to find a way to turn it around when things are so clearly off the rails. But, in terms of this game specifically, Chris, what were the biggest areas of primary concern, of which I'm sure there are many?
I'm going to start with the positive. So
what?
So for everybody who's been wanting more positive Timbers talk, turn the volume up for the next, I don't know, 20 seconds or so.
Crank it.
I thought the first 30 minutes or so played out pretty well for the Timbers. I think they got exactly out of that stretch of the game what they wanted. They were keeping their block defensively really low in order to try to keep SKC, and this makes a lot of sense given the personnel, from finding space in behind to force Alan Polito to drop deep to try to find the ball. And I thought they basically shut down SKC for the first half hour of the game or so. And they created from that a number of chances on their end. They clearly found a little bit of a wrinkle that they wanted to exploit on long throws. They pushed Larry Mabiala forward basically from minute 1 on long throws. They ended up getting a goal, kind of weirdly, but getting a goal from from one of those moments, and they kind of just created a little bit of chaos that way. And so if you look at the first 30 minutes of the game or so, and you only look at the first 30 minutes of the game or so, I think Gio Savarese has given himself a big old pat on the back, right? He's like, that is exactly how I wanted the first 30 minutes to go. I found a wrinkle, something we could exploit. We exploited it. We scored a goal. I shut down their attack. They really had nothing at all. And I sort of bent the field to a pretty positive sort of footing for us. Timbers were the better team in that first half hour. Okay. Turn the volume down if you're one of the folks who wants more positive Timbers talk. We're done with that.
Yeah, use that little like 10 or 15 second skip button.
Yeah,
if you get triggered by critical analysis of a sports team.
Yeah, and the analysis is critical because the play's been poor. That's it. I mean, look, you look at the last hour of the game, and I thought Kansas City did a nice job of starting to adjust. They started to really kind of sort of pound the wide areas to see if they could crack open that Timbers block that they'd set over the first 30 minutes. The first SKC goal kind of comes from that. But honestly, like that's a little bit of the risk you just take when you're playing as low a block as the Timbers were. And if that were the only goal of the game and the game finishes 1-1, I think Gio could live with that, right? If that's the goal you concede, great hit. Like, yeah, ball pressure should have been a little bit better in that moment, but it's not like that was a prime scoring opportunity. The XG value of that is like 0.02. Like, all right. Great hit, tip your cap, move on. If that's it, I think everybody's fine. But that wasn't it. The Timbers found a couple of chances after that. And I think overall, if you look at the first half, not terrible. Timbers certainly had a golden opportunity right before halftime to go up 2-1, where Frank Boley got on the end of a cross, a really nice cross from Dyrone Asprilla, who didn't have a great game overall, but had a good moment in that moment. And should have been a tap in, and it was not. It was a tap out. And then the Timbers came out of the locker room and tapped out of the game. They came out of the locker room, and the only flag they were carrying was the white one. And and that white flag was flying high by the 60th minute. They were done. When they gave up that second goal, game was over. And that's the part that I don't get. And that's the part that when people say the mentality is okay, I just have a hard time believing it.
Because that is something that Gio admitted and spoke about, and the players have spoken about, is that after that second goal, everything just, they just shut down.
And this is an important forking game.
Forking.
Yeah, that's right.
For those at home, that is what he said.
This is an important game. I mean, we talked about this stretch at like before May. Before May, we were like, hey, if the Timbers are going to make a run, May is their best opportunity to do it. If they're going to get themselves back in the thick of the actual competition in MLS, don't talk to me about the competition for ninth. Yes, the Timbers are in that, but whatever. That ain't shoot. If they want to get into the actual competition, May is their best opportunity to put themselves there. And this was very much one of those games in May where you circled and said, that's an opportunity to go get points. That's an opportunity to get points on the road. And that's an opportunity to not be a team that is averaging a point per game. And they had already dropped some important points in the month of May. We've talked about that. We don't need to rehash it. But there's still one last opportunity, right? In this stretch, there was one last chance to show that they were up for the fight. And not only were they not up for the fight, they didn't even seem interested in being in it. And so when we talk about whether the mentality is okay, it's not. Right? Like, this was an important game. These games in which the Timbers have an opportunity to get points, especially on the road, are important. And I agree. Gio basically admitted that, when he said there have only been two halves all year where I felt like the team gave up in Atlanta and at Kansas City. It's like, yeah, but that's not great. Especially in a game like this one in KC. And it was really disheartening to see. I don't really understand why in a game that the Timbers were very much in the first half, they just came out of the locker room looking disinterested, and they found a little bit of adversity in the second half and just curled into a ball and gave up. I don't understand why that happened, other than to say clearly there's something wrong with the mentality. And you know, Zach McGraw's comments to you, I think, sort of nodded to that. I thought they were honest.
Yeah, he did. He spoke plainly, and he said in one of the early quotes in the story that, you know, he thinks it's a mentality thing with this team. And later on in the story, a quote that I think that underscores the realistic viewpoint that he possesses. It's not necessarily true that all of his teammates might possess it, but I think that Zach is one of the guys that gets it right now. And, and Zach said that he thinks it's universally understood that the team needs more urgency, but he doesn't think that people understand how dire the position that they're in is. He said, we're still in the playoff 9th place with whatever our record is, 1 point per game. Looking just at the standings, it's easy to say, oh yeah, we'll be all right. But we've played more games than teams, so they're going to catch up. We can't just wait until August like we did last year, where we got 4 games in a row and still didn't even end up qualifying for the playoffs.
That's a reality-based perspective. Right. If Zach McGraw wants to come on this podcast and say that, absolutely. That's a reality-based perspective. And so like I fully believe that Zach gets it. I fully believe that Zach going into this game had the sort of like, we've got to get points. We've got to start racking up points perspective. I don't think we see it across the board. And, you know, I mean, we can look at things that SKC did in that second half. They were really aggressive in using long diagonals and to try to catch the Timbers in transition when they could. The Timbers were far too permissive in allowing those transitional moments, which they weren't in the first 30 minutes and in the first half. Far too permissive in allowing those transitional moments, and frankly, in just losing track of where SKC was parking runners in those moments. But I mean, I think there are tactical things that you can talk about, but I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to what Zach's talking about, which is there was not that collective across the board buy-in to be able to get a result out of the game. And so as a result, they got crushed. And look, I mean, they're 15 games in. They're on a point per game. You know, I always sort of keep an eye on what it would take for the rest of the year to get back to 1.5 points per game. I think a 1.5 per game is sort of the threshold for a good regular season. If you get you want to be top 4 going into the playoffs, right? That's, if you're top 4, then you get the home field advantage in the first round when it really matters, because it's the sort of 3-game series and 2 of them are going to be at home. And so you want to be top 4. If you're below 1.5 per game, not going to be top 4. Not going to happen. If you're right around 1.5, maybe. But I think it's a reasonable threshold for like what a good regular season is. You got to be above 1.5 if you want to consider it a good regular season. And now I think the Timbers would need something like 1.84 points per game from here on out in order to get to that threshold, which is like, I mean, that's it's not supporter shield pace right now, only because Cincinnati is like lighting the world on fire and it has like 2.4 points per game. That's better than double what the Timbers are doing. But it's pretty close. It's sort of like historic supporter shield pace. And you know, and so that is a formidable challenge to get back to that spot. And if they lose another couple of these games, which, you know, I mean, in the next 3, you can very easily see the Timbers taking another L or 2 or 3. If that happens, then it looks like it's basically impossible. And so, you know, are they still in the race to get 9th? Yeah, but that ain't shoot. And I think with every one of these opportunities to get points that slips away, that what you need to do to get to 1.5 points per game only gets higher, to the point where pretty soon it's just going to be like, that's not going to happen. It's unrealistic. It's impossible. So that's where they're at. And I think the mentality is clearly not great. I think in their comments, which I pointed out were a little befuddling, between Zach McGraw and Gio Savarese talking about the mentality. I think they're talking past each other a little bit, which is understandable. It's in interviews. They're at different times, in different places. It's not like it's an actual conversation, but when you put the quotes side by side, it's a little bit of a head scratcher, and it does cause some concerns about whether everybody is on the same page about what is required right now, and whether that understanding is shared collectively. But the Timbers have an opportunity this weekend to show that there is that understanding, and that the urgency is there, and it's in a big spot, and a spot where they've had success recently, and they should have a lot of confidence going into Lumen Field, where they've been pretty dominant over the course of the last few years against the Sounders. The Sounders haven't beaten the Timbers at Lumen Field since, again, time is not my strong suit, but I think since basically pre-pandemic. And so, this is a place where they should have some confidence. But, I mean, it's pretty close to a must-win.
And it's in that there. It's beyond a must-win. It's in that territory where when you win, you still don't feel like, okay, now things are
yeah, when you win, now you need to go and do that 3 or 4 more times, like in the next few games, is basically where they're at. They need to go on a run. Like isolated wins here and there aren't going to do it.
Yeah, and Zach even said in his comments, too, to go back to some of the things he said, that, they've been up for those games. They've been up for the games against Seattle and against Vancouver. The 2 most recent games against those sides are the example of that, right? They beat Seattle 4-1 in an amazing performance. They beat Vancouver 3-1,
and maybe their most comprehensive performance of the season.
Probably their most comprehensive performance of the season. And that was the one where at the time we were like, okay, maybe this is that game. Maybe this is the one where they, use this to build on the momentum and turn their season around. Did not happen. The games after that were a bunch of drop points, and they blew it down the stretch of May, and in a stretch that they needed to get serious points out of, to give themselves a little more breathing room against these really good teams they're going to play. They're playing Seattle, they're playing San Jose, they're playing Dallas. Yeah, the Chicago, Fire are coming into town.
They're a dumpster fire.
They're dreadful. But again, I don't even think 3 points are guaranteed from that game when you're Portland.
Well, I mean, I throw all sorts of shade at Chicago. They have better points per game than the Timbers do.
Yeah. I mean, that's where things are at right now, man. It's
so they might be a dumpster fire. The Timbers are a forest fire.
That's rough. And that's the name of the podcast this week, by the way. So the game on Saturday against Seattle, Jordan Morris will not be playing for the next couple of weeks. So that's a major sigh of relief for the Timbers that he's not going to be on the field, because he's been a killer this season for opposing defenses. There are a couple other,
although weirdly, like kind of a, like he's the anti-Raul Ruidiaz for the Timbers. Ruidiaz, basically, regardless of what form he's in, always kills the Timbers. Jordan Morris, basically, regardless of what what form he's in, does very little against the Timbers. They're sort of Jekyll and Hyde. So I in terms of how they show up in Timbers games. The other point is Seattle did play last night. They played actually the aforementioned San Jose Earthquakes last night midweek. Seattle rotated some, but they're going to be, I mean, just because of the some of their injuries and their absences, which every team has, just by the way, that comment is not intended for anybody in particular, which every team has, they sort of weren't able to rotate fully. So they're going to be certainly a number of guys coming through. Nico Lodero started, Alex Roldan started, Albert Rusnak started, Xavier Arriaga started, Nuhu started. I mean, Hebert started, and they lost 1-0 on a old friend Jeremy Abobasi goal to San Jose. So Seattle's going to have some heavy legs coming into this game. It sounds like Christian Roldan might be able to be coming back after a long absence on concussion protocol, which, first of all, good to hear that he's feeling better after a long layoff with a concussion. That's not something that you want to see anybody go through. But you've got to think he probably isn't 90 minutes fit coming off that absence. And so, I mean, that is a bit of a lifeline for the Timbers in this game, quite candidly, because the Timbers didn't have to play midweek. They're going to be much better rested going into what is going to be and should be. And if it's not, the Timbers should be really asking themselves some questions, a physically very taxing and very demanding game. And the Timbers should go out in this game looking to make it as physically demanding as humanly possible. Because the Sounders had to really push in a vain effort to try to get back into that game against San Jose last night. They created something ridiculous, like 3 XG, and didn't convert. And so the Sounders really had to kind of empty the clip to try to get anything out of that game. They weren't able to, and now they've got just a 2-day turnaround. So I think there's an opportunity there for the Timbers, but they're only going to be able to take advantage of it if the aforementioned mentality and if the aforementioned urgency is actually there. And if the Timbers aren't able to do that, and if they lose this weekend, I think there's going to be quite a bit of navel gazing, and the discussion is going to be about whether this is a team that has the ability to even get into the race for 9th.
Yeah, it gets to a point where you wonder if the season is, this season in particular, the 2023 season is pretty much lost, and you're looking to the transfer window to add, yes, for this year, but given the timeline of when players might arrive that you would sign, they have a desire to sign 2 or 3 players. Gio said 3 on Tuesday. Those priorities, as stated by Ned Grabavoy publicly, are first and foremost a center back, second most a young DP in an attacking position, likely a number 9. And then there's been talk about adding a midfield presence too, especially given the injuries to David Ajala and Eric Williamson. It'd be nice to have somebody like that right away to bolster your depth in that area. Although Christian Paredes has, despite the Timbers struggles, been one of the real shining lights of this season and a positive. But yeah, I mean, regardless of what happens in this transfer window, it's not going to rescue your season from the dumpster. It's going to be a nice addition that potentially makes things interesting down the stretch, gets you in at the 8 or 9 spot, and then next year is probably going to be the focus. If you're in this position where you maybe lose at Seattle, you don't get a good result in Dallas or against San Jose.
They've got 5 more league games before that window even opens. And if, as the summer transfer window usually goes, even if you make a signing early in the window, which I think you would hope for the Timbers here, very often those guys aren't here and ready to go until later in the window. And by that point, you're in August when the Timbers pick back up MLS play. I mean, for, Leagues Cup is whatever. But when the Timbers pick back up MLS play in late August, at that point, they've got, 10 or 12 games left in the season. And so even if those signings hit, even if they're better, you probably just don't have the runway to do shoot, right? So, now or never. And I think there's only a limited amount to which, the Timbers or Timbers fans or whoever can put, a lot of stock in hoping that the cavalry arrives in the summer transfer window. That might be important for 2024. I am really doubtful that that's going to be something that can save the 2023 season as it stands. Now, if they go in those 5 games before the window or in those 8 games before the Leagues Cup break comes, and they rack up some points and they pull themselves back into the race, maybe. But from 1 point per game, not going to do it.
That game Saturday, 1:30 p.m. on Fox, also for free on the Apple TV app. That'll be up in Seattle. I will be up there for that doubleheader, so I'll have coverage on OregonLive.com from both of those games. That's Timbers Sounders and Thorns Reign, 1:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. respectively at Lumen Field in Seattle on Saturday. That'll wrap it up for us here on Soccer Made in Portland for Chris Reifer, I'm Ryan Clark. Thank you for joining us. Make sure to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerMaidenPDX, at Chris Reifer, and at Ryan T. Clark. Like us wherever you follow podcasts. Maybe leave a review, positive or negative. We read them. We take constructive criticism. We aren't huge fans of ad hominem attacks, but we like constructive criticism of how we podcast. We always want to be better. We don't think we're geniuses. We are aware of the fact that people make mistakes. And with that, thanks again for joining us this week, and we'll see you next time.